The first time Winter saw it, she was just a child. She woke up to a neon purple room that wasn't hers. No familiar shapes, no comforts, just an unnatural, vivid glow that made everything feel wrong. But was it a dream? She'd never forget that night. Now, years later, there it was again. Not the room this time, but something even stranger. A boy standing at the end of a dark hallway, just watching her. The shadows shifting with an unnatural intent. Now, they say you can only see a ghost when you're looking for them. You see, Winter, she wasn't looking for ghosts, but they found her. Fast forward to now, a dark road, terrible accident, and a presence that's now within her home. They say trauma attracts spirits. Maybe it was the crash. Maybe it was Winter herself. But one night, as she lay in bed, she felt a hand pressed gently against her back. Her husband's familiar touch, a comfort, until she turned over and saw that he was fast asleep. What do you do when the person that you love is right beside you, but something else is taking their place? You see, this is Winter's story, a haunting that follows, that mimics, that knows exactly what comforts look like and how to twist them into fear. But Winter's story is just the beginning. Next, you'll hear the story of the Hollow Creek Road, where the Mitchell family thought that they had found their dream home, a farmhouse surrounded by trees with room for their 3 children to play. But almost from the moment that they moved in, strange things began to happen. There was footsteps in the night, voices calling their names, and their youngest daughter insists that she saw a lady in the closet. The Mitchells soon realized that their dream home, well, might be anything but. The boundaries between the ordinary and the supernatural blur in an instant, and once those lines are crossed, they can never truly be mended. Welcome to Retraced Echoes. Winter was just a child when she experienced something that would stay with her forever. It was the kind of memory that never truly fades, but one that feels almost too strange to be real, but too vivid to dismiss.
I woke up and I went into a bedroom that was not my own, and I just, everything was vibrant.
Everything felt wrong from the moment that she opened her eyes. The room was bathed in a purple glow, not the comforting nightlight she was so used to having in a room. It was something much brighter, almost neon. She'd gone to sleep in her small bedroom, surrounded by familiar things, her toys, her blankets, her nightlight. But that night, she woke up to something else. Winter remembers trying to make sense of it, her young mind struggling to understand what had happened. She would rub her eyes, hoping that it would all go back to normal, but nothing changed. It wasn't her room, it wasn't her bed, not her walls, not her space. The air felt thick, heavy in a way that made her feel like she shouldn't move. She remembers a silence being strange, almost as if the room itself was holding its breath. And then as suddenly she found herself there, it was all over. She was back. She was back in her own room. The purple glow was gone. It was not just her imagination. That night was the first time Winter truly felt something that, for her, disconnected her from reality. As if the world around her could change without any kind of warning. As if she could be pulled from her safe place into something unknown. And though she tried to forget it, to move on, the memory of that purple room never left her. A few years passed, and Winter began to believe that the strange experiences of the purple room, they might have just been a one-time occurrence. Life had returned to normal with school and friends and everyday rhythm of childhood. But then, something happened that shattered her sense of safety once again. It was late one night when Winter, now 13, found herself wandering down the hallway of her family home. The house was quiet. As she approached the end of the hallway, she noticed something. A figure, very small and still, just standing there.
I saw a boy standing at the edge of the hallway, at the end of the hallway.
It was a little boy, no older than she was, dressed in clothes that seemed somewhat out of place. He stood perfectly still, his face partially obscured by the shadows. Winter's breath caught in her throat as she froze. her eyes locked on the figure. She wanted to speak, to ask who he was or why he was there, but the words, they couldn't come. But the boy didn't move, didn't make a sound. He just stood there, just watching her. Then, just as suddenly as she had seen him, he was gone. One blink and the hallway was empty. She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, a trick of the light. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. The boy had been there, as real as anything else in her home. It was the second time that Winter felt the world around her shift. The line between reality and something stranger blurring once again. And just like the purple room, the image of that little boy lingered. He became a part of her memory, a reminder that the unknown could appear at any time without any warning, and that sometimes the things that we see are not meant to be understood. As Winter grew older, life seemed to move forward. She finished school, found herself adjusting to adulthood, and eventually she got married. She tried to adapt, building a life with her husband, focusing on things that brought her joy, but despite the new chapters in her life, those strange experiences, they never fully went away. Winter had always seemed to have this sensitive feeling about the world beyond, but there was one incident that seemed to intensify everything. One late evening, there was a screech of tires and the unmistakable sound of an impact.
We were watching Netflix and we heard the sound outside that was like a small thud.
A pedestrian had been struck near her home. Now Winter and her husband, they rushed outside only to find the aftermath. A figure lying still on the road. Neighbors gathering. Emergency lights flashing.
He did seem to be moving ever so slightly, but we weren't really sure. And so, we just waited on, the EMTs. But there was another car that took off that, found the car that hit him. And they got the license plate numbers and came back and, told the EMT, this is the license plate number.
Winter, she had gone to bed. She was tired after a long day. Her husband was still awake. It was not uncommon for him to go to bed much after her. He would usually stay up and do some of the things that he wanted to do. She began to fall asleep, holding her blankets all tucked in. But suddenly, she was pulled from her sleep by a very unmistakable sensation. It was a gentle touch on her back, as if her husband's hand was there, rubbing gently. And for a split second, just one split second, it felt comforting, felt familiar.
I turned over to reciprocate because that's generally what I would do. And my husband was completely passed out, facing away from me. And I woke him up and I was like, hey, did you just rub my back and then fall asleep? And he was like, no.
He hadn't touched her. He had come to bed relatively quietly, trying not to wake her up. The realization hit her. The touch, it was real, but it wasn't from him. It was hard for Winter to sleep that evening, and how could it not? Again, we're talking about a place of comfort. She felt safe inside of her own home. Her husband sleeps in her bed right beside her. She felt what she thought was the touch of his hand on her back, just to turn over and have the realization that it was not him at all. What a scary thought that is. So the next morning, her husband would get up and he would get some sage, and they would try to cleanse the house of whatever this dark entity was inside the home. And they thought it worked for about a week. Winter was laying in bed half asleep when she felt a very familiar dip in the mattress. She started to think to herself, see, now her and her husband was on opposing work schedules, and she was kind of in and out of consciousness, but she couldn't remember her husband coming home. She couldn't remember him putting the keys on the table. She couldn't remember hearing him walk to the bedroom. So she just kind of sat there. The dip in the mattress, it was unmistakable. She knew that there was someone sitting right beside her. Her eyes shot open, her heart began to race, and she would hold her breath, listening to the silence of the room, hoping that if anything, it was her husband. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Winter's husband, he wasn't home yet. The room was empty. Now, Winter's entire body went cold. She's trying to convince herself that it was nothing, but the pressure on the mattress, it was undeniable. She stared into the darkness, too afraid to move, her body frozen, and about an hour later, she heard her husband come home, the door creaking open, his footsteps echoing through the hallway. She didn't mention the weight of the bed immediately, but waited until he finally came to bed. She whispered to him about what she had felt earlier. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing with concern. She watched as he reached out and touched the spot where the weight had been, though by now it had lifted. The fear in Winter's heart, it didn't fade. She knew whatever it wasn't gone for good. Now, Winter again, she just barely slept the rest of the night, her eyes darting around the room, waiting for something to happen yet again. She knew now that whatever they was dealing with, it wasn't gone, it was still here. It was making itself known in ways that she could no longer ignore. Now, strangely enough, a year passed and life kind of went on. The unsettling presence seemed to have faded away, allowing Winter and her husband to feel some type of normal life again. The whispers, the chills, the shadows, they all had quieted down, and Winter began to hope that whatever it was had finally left. They focused on life together, filling their days with work and friends and small joys, and for a while, it felt like they was truly free of the disturbances that had once plagued them. But one winter night, the presence, it returned, and it was more intimate than it had ever been before. Again, Winter had went to bed, exhausted from a long day. She would settle into the warmth of her blankets, drifting quickly to a deep sleep. And sometime later, she felt it, a very familiar feeling, yet entirely different. The weight of a body slipping into a bed right beside her. Winter's eyes shot open, her body tensing, and she turned, her head ever so slightly, expecting to see her husband beside her, but the other side of the bed was yet again empty. Panic surged through her. She threw the blankets off and sat up quickly, her eyes darting around the room, her breaths, they came in short gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was empty. The room was just completely empty, and she realized her husband had not come to bed yet. He was still in the other room. Now, this last occurrence was just 2 weeks ago, and since that night, Winter continues to feel the presence in very undeniable ways. The weight on the bed, the whispers in the dark, the cold air that seems to follow her. It's all still there, lingering just out of sight. Now, Winter knows that whatever it is that's haunting her hasn't gone away. It watches and it waits. And sometimes it reaches out. She's still dealing with her haunting, so let's wish her the best of luck. But let's now move on to another story. One that begins not with a mysterious room, but with a child's strange new friend. There are places where the unknown leaves its mark. Places where families try to start anew, only to find that the past is not always easily escaped. Sometimes the shadows of what haunt us at one home, they seem to find a way to another. Now, the Mitchell family, they moved into a house on Hollow Creek Road in late October. It was everything they had hoped for, a white 2-story farmhouse nestled in the trees with a wraparound porch and enough room for their 3 children to roam and explore. Spent the first days unpacking, painting, and settling in, enjoying the quiet life the countryside offered. But something about the house, it never felt quite right, even from the beginning. Started with small things, footsteps that was heard on the stairway late at night, doors that would close and then very slowly creak back open. Karen thought it was just an old house settling. I mean, the house was over 100 years old, she told herself whenever she would hear the creaks from above when she would wash the dishes late at night. Her husband, Tom, he would shrug off the occurrences as just drafts or bad hinges. Things that's very easy to explain with a house that was that age, but the children, especially their youngest Emily, they were not so reassured. Now, Emily, she was only 6. She refused to sleep in her own room after the first week. She said she didn't like the old lady in the closet. Now, Karen just brushed it off as an overactive imagination. Probably the results of just the moving alone. That affects all children. But still, every night, Emily would sneak into her parents' room, her eyes wide and trembling, whispering about how the lady had been watching her again. A little bit of time went by. One night, Tom was sitting and reading in the living room, and he heard the unmistakable sound of girls giggling upstairs. Now, that wasn't unusual, except for the fact that both of his daughters were asleep right beside him on the couch. Tom was frozen. He would stare over at the dark stairway, the laughter echoing again, a playful giggle, and then the sound of tiny feet running across the floor above. He would slowly stand up, his heart pounding as he would creep over to the stairs. The hallway light as he would walk up the stairway beginning to flicker as he would reach the top. As he would come to Emily's room, the door would be wide open. The closet door, it was ajar, and the air inside the room was cold enough to make Tom's breath fog. But yet there was no one in the bedroom. And the sounds, they disappeared. It was about a week later, and Karen had her own encounter in the kitchen. See, she was making herself some lunch when she heard her name. It was whispered almost so softly that she thought she imagined it. Karen. The voice seemed to come from right behind her ear, sending a chill down her spine. She would spin around, but the kitchen was empty. The voice came again, this time from the hallway. She took very slow and deliberate steps towards the sound, each one echoing in the silence of the house. As she approached the basement door, it creaked open on its own, revealing only the darkness below. This was so terrifying she could not find herself even considering the thought of going down the stairs. She would tell Tom about it. Karen and Tom finally had to accept the fact that there was something really wrong with this house when they were awoken one night to Emily crying. Rushing into her room, they found her standing in the corner, staring at the closet. Her eyes were wide, glazed over, almost as though she was in a trance. Tom would scoop her up, shaking her gently, but her gaze remained fixed on the dark space. From the closet, a low moaning sound seemed to rise, a mournful echo that made the hair on Karen's arm stand up. With that, they made the decision to leave the house soon after. They packed up in a frenzy, unwilling to spend another night beneath that roof. On their last day, as they loaded their very last set of boxes into the car, Emily turned to the house to wave. When Karen asked her why, Emily simply said the lady wanted to say goodbye. She says she'll miss me. Karen didn't ask any more questions. She didn't want to know the answers. The Mitchells never really spoke much about the house after that, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingers. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Also, if you've not subscribed to the channel, what are you waiting on? Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments down below, what story do you want to hear next? Or perhaps maybe you have a story of your own. Be sure to go over to our website and leave it in the submit a story section. And who knows, maybe your story will be in the next episode of Retraced Echoes. Until I see you on the next podcast, goodbye.